right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to day 2 of the 7th Vasant Vihar LitFest. As you can see, it's a very, very pleasant, breezy morning, and we are just hoping and praying that there is no drizzle, but I think the weather is very, very nice, and we'll enjoy day 2 of the LitFest. We have all seen 2 life-disrupting and life-changing years thanks to a global pandemic. Our club, of course, adapted to the circumstances and had the LitFest over the digital platform. We are now delighted to return to a live LitFest. The theme of this year's LitFest reflects the circumstances of the world today and everyone's desire to see peace and prosperity in the world, and perhaps a little more focus on the good things in life, namely art and culture. Before we start the day's proceedings, I would like to call our President, Lieutenant General Shankar Prasad, to say a few words about the LitFest and what you can expect over the next few days, next 2 days.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you all to our 7th LitFest, which we just inaugurated yesterday evening. The inauguration and the inaugural address being done by Dr. Karan Singh. What pleased us last evening immensely was the fact that the theme which we have chosen for our LitFest this year was so beautifully transformed into the Vedantas by Dr. Karan Singh in the evening yesterday. Just as a matter of interest, this is the 7th literary festival we are holding in Vasant Vihar. We started with the first one in 2017. So 17, 18, 19 and 20, we were able to do all physical LitFest here, pretty much similar to what we are doing now. But in between 2 years, because of COVID, we had to kind of do only virtual, which also were reasonably all right, but not the same kind of feeling that you get in a physical one. Having done about so many LitFests here and having seen a number of LitFests elsewhere and to have heard about them, not physically attended, like the Jaipur LitFest and the Lahore LitFest and many such festivals across our part of the world, I thought this year, as early as about October and November, that we must have a LitFest with a theme this year. And by that time, the Ukraine and the Russian war had already started manifesting itself into a variety of situations which were unbelievable, to say the least. So as early, and why I'm saying this is with a purpose. I thought of this theme because I thought this is going to be really the hit in the next many years, maybe many decades. But it so happens that the G20 and the Raisina dialogues that are just currently on and just at the moment on, and I hadn't the foggiest idea whether the dialogue is taking place or not, and I hadn't the foggiest idea what G20 was going to do. But somehow I felt that 4 things which are really hitting the world today, and they are the security issues, the economic issues, the women empowerment and the atrocities done on women, and of course the climate change. So I chose these as a theme for this year's LitFest. So while trying to coin a word for it, I felt that the best word to do for this is a peace, prosperity, art and culture. Why peace? The answer is, are we in peace mode today? What is the objective of all these world forums that we have? We have the G20s, we have the BRICS, we have the SARCs, and dozens of more. What is the first thing they talk about? That let's have peace. Let's have prosperity. What does it mean? Stop killing people is what they mean. And what exactly are we doing today? Going on killing people. I don't know what the numbers are because the media gives all kinds of versions. It could be in lakhs, it could be in God knows how many thousands. Russians killed, Ukrainians killed, Arabs killed, Israelis killed, Iranians killed. Oh, you name it, everywhere people are getting killed. So is this the peace that we are looking at today? When I spoke about this to Dr. Karan Singh a couple of days ago, I had a couple of meetings with him, and I said, sir, this is the theme. He said, but General Saab, Hearing this from a general of the army sounds a bit odd. You guys kill people, so you're talking about peace. I said, yes, sir. Generals don't want to fight a war. Generals want to prepare for war so that nobody dares to fight. That's the job of a good general. It's not the job of the general to go to war and kill hundreds and thousands of people. Then he's a no good general. A general is a good general. Sun Tzu says so, that if you can win a war without bloodshed, then you are the guy. So what do? We must make our country, we must make the world, each one of us, strong. And therefore there'll be no war. Just because Ukraine was so weak, the Russians then dressed it. Anyway, I don't want to discuss the Ukraine-Russian war, but that led me to the idea of promoting the peace and the understanding amongst all of us who are a part of the civil society to see exactly what peace means and how we are achieving it. The next major issue is the economic condition. I think, and all of you are great economists sitting, I don't want to go into the details of economy, but the world economy is in a total tailspin today. Tell me what's happening anywhere in the world. Perhaps India is amongst the better countries today, if you ask me. The prices are soaring. The petrol is selling at £2 a litre in Europe. The currencies have gone through a tumultuous period. The Pakistani rupees, about 300 or 275, 280 rupees to a dollar? So there is a tremendous amount of economic distress in the country today. Women empowerment, no need to elaborate, it's been going on continuously. And I say that is women empowerment only related to so far as just the elections are concerned? Just because you want to garner their votes that you want to talk about women empowerment, soon after that you forget about it? And lastly, the climate change. Of course, everybody understands what climate change is. We go through it every day. You see what's happening in India, the glaciers melting, the earth sinking. All of it is man-made. So we thought we'll discuss this. But a LitFest cannot end with just panel discussions. So we have chosen a few books which are pretty much related to the theme of peace and prosperity. And the first book that we're going to discuss is about a book written by Pawan Verma. You all know him. He's written a book called The Great Hindu Civilization, which will bring some sense at least into Indians, if not the globe. The second, we are also doing a book by Tilak Devisar on the Pashtuns, which is also supposed to be quite an interesting book. And just like 2-3 other books, one amongst them being OTT on Bollywood versus OTT and the books written to convert into OTT. And the issue is OTT overtaking the Bollywood films? And of course, the last major issue is about the electronic vehicles. And that should be interesting as well. We have a diamond session as well. And we're doing a session on laboratory-grown diamonds. There's a little exhibition put up by them. Must go and see it. It's worth the while. We also have 2 beautiful exhibitions. Please go through them. A fantastic exhibition on the bonsais and an equally fantastic exhibition by the artisans of India. And 4 of them are Padma Shri awardees. You must go and see what fine arts that they're performing. I'm a bit apologetic at the moment to say that the audience are not enough, but it seems the audience don't care about economy. And therefore the economy is in tailspin. So without going any further, I'm trying to elongate it as much as possible so that some more people turn up, but not many seem to be turning up. So with these, we want to start our second day of the LitFest. The first day got a great start. We'll seriously, and I have a number of people in the audience, my panelists may please note, who have traveled from distances to come here today, only to listen to an outstanding panel. The most professional domain experts in economy are present with us today. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Enjoy the morning, enjoy the day, and I hope you will find it useful. Thank you, Siraj.
Yes, sir. I'm here. Thank you, sir. As I said before, the last 2 years have been disruptive. It affected the lives of millions of people. It impacted the global supply chain. It restricted movement. And when the pandemic seemed to subside, a war broke down in Europe, which, while directly involving two countries, actually has ramifications in a number of countries. Food shortages were felt in a number of countries. Supply chain disruption led to price escalation of a lot of commodities, and economies were under severe pressure. While almost every country was impacted in some measure or the other, some have handled it better than the other. And as Jan Prasad said, India's rise in the global economy has been much talked about topic in recent months. While India overtook UK in 2022 as the fifth largest economy, there are analysts and economists who are seeing the opportunity for India to grow further and faster than a number of other world economies, and perhaps overtake Japan and Germany to become the third largest economy in the world by 2030. During these last 3 years of turmoil and turbulence in the world, India has strengthened its position. Whether it becomes the third largest economy or not, or whether it happens sooner rather than later, may be a debatable issue. But with a population of 1.4 billion, becoming the third largest economy is perhaps not the objective India should be focusing on. We need to make the benefits inclusive across the classes and improve the well-being and lifestyle of the entire population. Anyway, I am not the speaker of the topic. I shall leave it to our distinguished panel to share their views on the impact of global headwinds on the Indian economy. And the panelists this morning are Dr. Onkar Goswami. May I request all the panelists, Dr. Onkar Goswami, Dr. Rajiv Kumar, and Professor Sachin Chaturvedi to come on the stage, and then I will introduce them. Dr. Onkar Goswami is a professional economist who did his master's in economics from the Delhi School of Economics in 1978 and his PhD from Oxford in 1982. He taught, collaborated, and researched economics for 18 years at Oxford, Delhi School of Economics, Tufts, Jawaharlal Nehru University, Rutgers University, and the Indian Statistical Institute, New Delhi. He was also the editor of Business India from 1996 to 1998, and the chief economist at the Confederation of Indian Industry thereafter. Dr. Goswami has been a consultant to the World Bank, the IMF, and the Asian Development Bank, and the OECD. He serves on the board of Godrej Consumer Products and Adani Enterprises. From 2004, Dr. Goswami was the founder and chairman of CERG Advisory Private Limited. Dr. Rajiv Kumar is the chairman of Pehle India Foundation, a non-profit making research think tank. He is the former vice chairman of Niti Aayog and member Global Leadership Council, GASP New York, and the director of Parle India Foundation. Nothing to do with Parle products. He also serves as the chancellor of Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics, Pune, and chairman of the Board of Governors at the Giri Institute of Development Studies, Lucknow. He has wide experience of having worked in academia, government, industry, as well as in multilateral institutions. He started his academic career in Indian Council for Research and on international economic relations as a researcher in 1977 and later became the director. He was a professor at the IIFT and a senior fellow at the Center for Policy Research. In the in the government, he was economic advisor with Department of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance. He has been with the Asian Development Bank, CII, as its chief economist, besides being Secretary General at FICCI and on the boards of SBI and RBI. Dr. Kumar has a PhD in economics from Lucknow University and a DPhil from Oxford University. And Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, currently Director General at the Research and Information System for Developing Countries, a New Delhi-based think tank. He works on issues related to development economics, involving development finance, SDGs, and South-South cooperation, apart from trade, investment, and innovation linkages with special focus on WTO. Currently, he is Vice Chairman of Madhya Pradesh State Policy and Planning Commission and Vice Chairman Atal Bihari Vajpayee Institute of Good Governance and Policy Analysis, and member, Board of Governors, Reserve Bank of India. He was Global Justice Fellow at the Macmillan Center for International Affairs at Yale University, Developing Country Fellow at the University of Amsterdam, Visiting Fellow at the Institute of Advanced Studies Shimla, and Visiting Scholar at the German Development Institute. He has served as a visiting professor at the Jawaharlal Nehru University and has been closely associated with the UN Food and Agricultural Organization, the World Bank, UN, ESCAP, UNESCO, OECD, and many other agencies. His book, The Logic of Sharing, Indian Approach to South-South Cooperation, has been acclaimed internationally as one of the best volumes on international development cooperation. Apart from this, he has authored, edited 21 other books, apart from contributing several chapters in the edited volumes and publishing several research articles in prestigious journals. So as General Prasad said, a very, very distinguished and knowledgeable panel, and it's over to you, Dr. Goswami, who will be the moderator. You want to come there? They can give you mics there if you want.
No, I'm much better off here.
Okay. You want the water?
Yeah, thanks. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I thought the best way of doing this is perhaps to give 10 to 12 minutes to each one of us to say what we have to say. So if it's 12 minutes, then it's 36 minutes in all, and then give the residual 24 minutes for question and answers as they come along. Is that okay? Yeah. So, I don't think there is a shade of doubt, unless something quite terrible happens, like another COVID pandemic or something like that. Those black swan events can occur. But I don't think there's a shade of doubt that over the next 3 to 4 years, for sure, India will be growing at least 6.5% real, that is adjusted for inflation, per year. So at least 6.5% per year. Maybe a tad lower, but more like a tad higher than 6.5%. Now, if you were to look at all the countries that matter in the world with a sizable economy, this will be the consistently highest growth rate that will happen compared to other large economies, such as China, such as the United States, such as the European Union put together. So the question of India growing at less than 6.5% or less than 6% over the next 4 or 5 years, beyond that, you are a clairvoyant. You shouldn't be talking more than that. Even 5 is like pushing it, is a given. And we will be the fastest growing, as we already are, the fastest growing large economy going forward for the next 4 and 5 years. So given that, I am not so concerned about global headwinds. A very large percentage of India's GDP is to do with domestic consumption, domestic production, and domestic investments. So I would be less worried about global headwinds than most people. But I would be worried about a few things, which is to deal with us. So not at all worried about the overall growth in the least bit. However, let me share the 4 or 5 things that concern me deeply. And this has nothing to do with the current regime at all. It has nothing to do with the Modi government or the pre-Modi government. It is almost become structural and therefore so worrying. The first is employment. Employment in an age that is increasingly going to go into artificial intelligence. Let me just share just a few numbers with you. In 2020, the population of India was 1.4 billion, close to 1.4 billion. We had almost 175 million people who were in the ages of 19 to 25. And that, over the next 5 years, will go up to 200 million people, the ages of 19 to 25. People who are coming out of high school and either working or trying to do a post-high school education. That's a huge amount of people, 175 going up to 200 million people. And also, between 26 to 40, which is also a working population, we right now have about 330 million people, which is going to go up to about 355 million people in a 6-year period. These are huge numbers, huge numbers. And the concern really is, how can they get employment? Let me share with you something that each one of you know, which is, take a snapshot 15 years ago and take a snapshot now at each of the major crossings in Delhi, in South Delhi. 15 years ago, there were some people who came to beg. But today, at each of the crossings in South Delhi, there are a large number of people who are begging for sustenance. They are the extreme low end of the spectrum. But the fact is that this large number of people of 19 to 25 and 26 to 40, I can't see what we are doing. We are growing at 6.5, but I can't see how a large number of them will get necessary employment. And that worries me enormously, because people are not quiet anymore. The days, when there was the Bengal famine of 1943, 3.5 million people died, and there were only 2 instances of riots, only 2. People just died, okay? This is not going to be the case. People will protest without jobs. People will be all over the place wanting jobs which they are not getting. And so this is my first concern for India. Employment in an age which is going to be increasingly dominated by artificial intelligence and handheld devices. Any of you who are in the corporate world or involved in the corporate world will know that over the last 6 or 7 years, every year, virtually each company has reduced its workforce. I've been on the board of, in the last 5 or 6 years, over 12 or 13 companies, and every company has been reducing the workforce. So the question, because it's not necessary anymore. And the question is, in a situation where people are reducing the workforce, and this is the kind of supply side of people that are coming in, how do you generate employment? My second concern is urbanization. A very large number of people, increasingly now than ever before, are leaving rural and semi-urban India into urban India, and they are doing so with the expectation, with a simple expectation which was modeled in 1970 by 2 fantastic economists, Harris and Todaro, a simple expectation that the probability of their getting a job with at least as much that they got in agriculture in rural India is higher, so they want to come in and get a job, right? So we are going to face a greater degree of movement from the non-urban areas to urban areas, and we are simply not prepared for it. We have simply not prepared for the kind of urbanization that we need. We are simply not prepared for the kind of infrastructure that we need to accommodate this urbanization. So that's my second. So employment in an AI age. The second is urbanization. The third is healthcare. Again, it is a disaster. And the amount that state governments get money, but the amount that is spent on everything other than healthcare by the state governments, because it's largely a state subject, is so much that very little is left for healthcare. And so whether it be primary health, whether it be intermediate, I'm not even talking of super specialty hospitals. I'm just talking of primary and intermediate health. We are really, we have been behind, and we are, relatively speaking, falling behind even further on issues to do with healthcare. And my final worry is education. When we have that many people in the workforce potentially coming in, and we have such poor education as we have now, and it's not just formal education, it's even tertiary education, it's training education, it's work-oriented education. When we have that, there is a mismatch, a tremendous mismatch that is going forward. So to complete the whole thing, number one, I have no concerns about 6.5% growth over the next 4 to 5 years, and therefore we will continue to be the fastest growing nation, I think. But I have concerns about employment in an increasingly artificial intelligence age. I have concerns about urbanization. I have concerns about healthcare, and I have concerns about education. This has nothing to do with the current government or the previous one. It is a neglect that has occurred for a very long period of time in India, and it is now going to come and bite us. So we will grow, but we will grow with a lot of mosquito bites. Thank you very much.
Especially as I'm a resident, so this is my kind of give back to the Vasant Vihar moment. So great to be here. Thank you very much, General Shankar Prasad, for inviting me here. In the next 12 minutes that I have, and I thought this is going to be also focused on a budget a little bit, but let me give you a broader picture, and in very sort of staccato bullet points, if you like. First, I think everybody agrees that this has been a prudent budget. So it's got, this has been the headlines all over because it's maintained what is called fiscal prudence, and has a fiscal glide path that it'll go to. We'll keep our fiscal discipline, and that's very good, by the way, because if you look at countries like Argentina or Brazil or Turkey, etc., who keep letting their debts go up and then borrow abroad, and then they got all sorts of problems. So that's been a characteristic of the Indian fiscal management, and I think that's good. It's also got a lot of kudos for a very high ramp up of public expenditure, 30% increase, and 3.5% of GDP, transfers to states, conditional transfer to states. So that's now 3.4% of GDP, and so therefore, and within that public expenditure, which is seen to be a kind of a compensation for the weak private investment. I think the government is doing what it can, and the 2.5 trillion, 2.5 lakh crores allocated to the railways for the first time is, I think, also very commendable. Within that, therefore, further the budget has received sort of credit because for the first time you're talking about agriculture, natural agriculture, you're talking about warehousing, you're talking logistics, and those investments are there, and and you're preparing India, as it were, to be, improve its productivity in the agricultural sector, which by with all indicators is one of the most backward sectors that we have.
something like 40%, 50% of the population engaged in agriculture, producing no more than 18% of our GDP, is something that we can't live with, and the costs continue to go up. So that's something that that they've done, and which is and natural farming, which is zero chemical farming, has been something that I was pushing in Niti Aayog in a big way. So that's announcement of PM Pranam, Pradhan Mantri Pranam Yojana, which incentivizes the states to reduce their urea consumption. I think is a wonderful step in this direction. So, let me not go on, but, all of us have read all of this, but let me say that there are some downside risks facing the country. And did the budget address those? And because going forward, I mean, that's the way to look forward, because otherwise we'll be analyzing the past, and that doesn't take us very far. And what are the downside risks that you and I can see? The first the budget mentions pretty much itself is that the private investment is not taking off. And my strong belief is that this country will grow or not grow only on the basis of private investment and private enterprise. It's been for centuries, it's been millennia. It's the private sector, the private business, the private entrepreneur which has pushed this country forward, and that's what will take the country going forward. So that's one weakness, and we need to. Second is that it's now clear in the latest quarter budget announcement, 4.4%, and the manufacturing sector showing a decline, that both rural and urban consumption demand has been weakening. And after the spurt of the post-pandemic, sort of a spurt that everybody saw, I think this is now even the high contact sectors like tourism and hospitality are now their growth rate is coming down. And if you look at the sort of anything like urban consumption indicators like share prices of D-Mart, for example, or the sale of more two-wheelers, etc., which is the rural demand, you will see that this is weakened, and that's something that we need to be. That was, to me, a downside risk. I hope it doesn't come about, but that's. The third one is and Onkar has mentioned it in some extent, is the social sector. The quality, access and quality to education and health sectors. Those are the two big ones, because our major competitive advantage is human resources, human talent. We will have 800 million people in the workforce by 2047, the largest, and we'll be the net supplier of skills and so on. So that's this health, the social sectors, which keeps this human talent growing and improving, etc., the education. So that's to me the other downside risk. And finally is employment, and he's talked about again, but I wanted to specifically refer to something that's close to my heart, which is the very low female labor force employment in this country. Half the working population, the average is about, I think now 11% or something like that. And in other countries it's much more. So then the question, therefore, to my mind is that how are these weaknesses addressed? So consumption, you had a tax relief, which the finance minister, the honorable finance minister, said will give you 40,000 crore worth of demand boost, and that was the sort of reduction in the basic rate, the increase in it, and also the removing of the cess, the reduction in the cess at the highest levels, which will improve consumption demand, but I'm not sure by how much. The second one is the demand that comes from domestic side, but what about exports? Because that's the other part of demand. Because if you can get external export demand going, and the finance minister mentioned this, but then in the budget itself you don't find any measure, which to say how to incentivize exports going forward. And the fact remains that unless we improve our share in the world trade of goods and services, not just keep going up and down with the world trade, but improve our share, which has been stagnant in the goods sector at about 1.7%, and services about 4%. This external demand, and then that's the global headwinds, because and as economists must disagree to a certain extent. So let me say that Omkar's confidence about global headwinds not affecting us, I don't share it. We are coupled very strongly with the global headwinds, and if the global markets turn down through the export and external demand, we will get affected. So what did we do that? But finally, for me, in this weaknesses thing, private investment, private growth, the private capex cycle, we must examine as to why isn't it taking off. There could be 2 or 3 reasons for it. One, the capacity utilization is still quite weak. 72-73% is the latest RBI figure. People tell me that unless you go up to 80%, boards, company boards don't decide to invest more. That's one issue, and I think that remains low. So that's one reason. The second reason, I think, is growing uncertainty both about the world and domestic investment environment. And that's something that we need to tackle very urgently, if you like. And this is especially for, so there are these very large and I wrote an article on it, and I believe in the K-shaped recovery that has taken place. That those who are big, the large corporates, their profitability has improved, their balance sheets have improved, etc., etc. And so they are growing, and they've shown amazing growth. But the lower leg of the K, which is the 6.5 crore small and medium enterprises, of which 5,000 are the large ones, they are not performing. And they are not, and despite the emergency credit scheme that has been launched by the government, etc., but when you go out there and see large numbers of closures which haven't come back, reduction, in revenues, so that is and unless we cater to those and cater beyond those by not just emergency credit, but maybe some other measures, and I had argued for that in Niti Aayog that we could do some direct help, fiscal help, like many other countries had done, to keep that segment going. Germany, for example, and China, we won't be able to do it. So, but that, and then finally, the weakness in the social sector. If you compare the budget estimates for this year, 23-24, to the budget estimates of 22-23, you will find that the increase in both health and education expenditure is actually quite marginal. And in fact, in some sense, in some cases, you will find that it's even gone down. So how would you improve your human talent and human resources? Now, some of it, this is what requires that you had to spend more fiscally than what you've done today. But then the question comes, if you spend more, then what happens to your fiscal deficit? That will go up, and that will not go, you will not go down to the glide path. And this is especially true in a situation where you have a tightening monetary policy, where the Reserve Bank, by force, because it has to bring the inflation down, has to keep reducing the amount of money available, the money supply available, and keep contracting the demand. So very often we talk about in economics that if you've got a contracting monetary policy, you need to compensate that by a expansionary fiscal policy. Now, can the fiscal deficit be maintained while government spending a little more to improve consumption, improve the small and medium enterprises? My answer is an emphatic yes. And from Niti Aayog, we had said very clearly, and I still maintain it, that key is your disinvestment and asset monetization. If you can reduce the size of the public sector, where it should not be, and this government came on the premise that this government business is not being in business, that targets have continuously been lowered. And this budget talks about only 50,000 crore. And while we in Niti Aayog, I used to chair the committee which will recommend candidates for privatization, not much has happened. And you can discuss it later. But more than privatization, actually, what we in Niti Aayog had done also to say that there is a process of asset monetization. The government sector sits on incredible wealth of assets, which for a large part are not efficiently utilized. and which can have a much bigger rate of return, much higher rate of return than what they earn today. We had estimated, and this is on record, that up to 6 lakh crores of assets could be monetized in the next 5 years or next 4 years, and this figure can perhaps be going up. And just one example, ladies and gentlemen, I would like you to, one sort of question, look at how many public sector enterprises have guests in the 5 metro cities of this country and in the nice tourist resorts up in the Himalayas. This is an incredible number, and the occupancy rate is about 10%, no more, because they're all reserved to the public sector employees. Why can't these guest houses be converted with the help of some very large hotel company, the public-private sector, into more return-earning assets, if you like? Just one example. So those two, if you do, the privatization and asset monetization, would give you up to 3-4 lakh crores, 2-3 lakh crores extra revenue, which is non-tax revenue. And that could be used to improve your fiscal situation either by reducing the debt so that your interest does not account for 43% of your revenue receipts, or by incurring revenue expenditure. When you get a compression and you expand capital expenditure, the compression comes in the revenue sectors, and which is where health, education, malnutrition, etc., they all take a sort of cut, as you like. So I think there is a way out, but that requires even more reform than what this government has done. This government has done tremendous amount of reforms, and I've been a part of it, and I say it with complete conviction that the sort of reform that have been done in these 8 years are unimaginable, if you like, in the previous decades. But you could do more, and you need to do more, and that's where I want to end, which is that yes, 6.5% rate of growth is good, but is not good enough. The Prime Minister's call for India being a developed country at the end of 25 years, in 2047, requires a higher rate of growth. The way you define a developed country. I have an article coming up, and Surjit, if you want to, you need to increase your per capita incomes at least at 6% per annum. And for that, the GDP must grow at about 6.5%, more than 7%. Are we achieving that? Are we on the track of that? We can do it. The rate of growth, potential rate of growth of Indian economy, I think is above 8%. OECD estimated that in 2012, and I think we need to grow at 8% plus to be able to achieve our own targets, our own aspirations, and the aspirations of an exploding population, which CMI data tells me that the age group between 20 to 30 today, the unemployment rate is about 40%. So we need to change that, and for that we need higher rates of growth, and we can't be satisfied by telling ourselves that we are the fastest growing large economy. We need to be a faster growing large economy as we go forward. Thank you very much. Bye.
Good morning, and thanks to Vasant Vihar Club for this invitation that we got today, all of us here on this extremely important theme. We heard Dr. Onkar Goswami, Dr. Rajiv Kumar, and I think General Shankar Prasad, right in the beginning, laid out the broad contours of our discussions. I have another commitment and have to rush. I would be extremely brief. As General mentioned, Raisina dialogue is going on, and some of us are very closely involved. So I have a session there, but I would be extremely brief in terms of how I see the economic headwinds that this session is expected to address. I have 3 points in my mind that I want to share with you. Number one is in terms of Asia and Asia's traction, the calculations that the International Monetary Fund has come up with in their latest report. It shows the larger traction of global economic growth would come from Asia. Almost 62% of that would come from Asia, that traction. And within that 62%, the two countries that would be accelerating the global growth would be China and India. So these two countries are going to take forward the global economic growth that we are expecting. So we are going to be part of the global process that is going to take forward how global growth would go forward. The predictions as they are coming in for 2023, IMF has estimated 4.7% global economic growth, which is higher than what they expected in 2022, which was 3.8%. So that, I think, is something extremely clear. The challenges of China, we all are seeing, they are getting unfolded by the day. Lots of new initiatives China is planning to undertake. Some of us who attended the session at Raisina yesterday with Chinese, we got first-hand information as to what they are trying to do in terms of coping up, etc. But that, I think, is something we would have to take forward. So this is the first point that I wanted to make, that India and China would make a very important contribution in the years ahead, particularly this financial year as is being predicted. The second point I want to make is in terms of what Dr. Onkar Goswami and Dr. Rajiv Kumar from two different perspectives raised, and that point comes in terms of what policy track India would go. Dr. Onkar Goswami said India would not be affected. Dr. Rajiv Kumar said India would be part of that. I think it would be important for us to see what policy track we continue to follow. And that, I think, would require continuity of the government, the stable administration, and stable policy making. Just one example that I want to give now is in terms of the point that Dr. Kumar mentioned in terms of global inflation and its impact, our strategy on rate of interest. Being on the board of the Reserve Bank last 1.5 years, we have been very closely observing how pressures come in terms of we raising rate of interest. And as you might have observed, throughout Q3 and Q4 last year and Q1 this year, we are seeing a sort of very stable approach. And this, I think, is absolutely important for India to have that endogeneity within our decision-making process. The Reserve Bank of India did not yield to the pressures that came in terms of we enhancing or even responding to global coordination that several of the G20 platforms and other global platforms, even at Basel, have been talking about the coordination among the countries. And this has paved way. There is a trade-off how you do the rate of interest management and how you respond to the domestic inflation in your own country. So as you know, these two sort of instruments that government or the central bank has, they have to be sort of managed, and this coherence that we see in policy making between Ministry of Finance and RBI, I think that's absolutely important. So my second point is about the centrality of policy making, for which fiscal stability, policy stability are extremely important. And this has now shown the sort of response that we are seeing, be that in the realm of our currency stability, with the sort of response that we are seeing now, the world that we see as our reference point, particularly the Western world, both US and EU, we are seeing the deceleration in the economies. We are seeing even in Q3, there is a sort of recession, though not officially accepted, but it is continuing to be a major challenge, and currency fluctuations of the US dollar are extremely important. And this is something which is largely coming out of the internationalization of the USD that has happened and how that has gone down. The third point that I want to mention is in terms of the $28 trillion global debt crisis that we are talking of. And out of that whole share, almost 32% is the share of the Chinese. The central bank governors and finance minister met in Bangalore. If you look at the statement that the foreign ministers of G20 issued on 2nd, and if you juxtapose that over the statement that central bank governors and finance ministers issued in the summary that was issued in both the cases. That summary is absolutely telling in terms of what situation we are going to end up in the days to come. I think it's a bright trajectory for India. We need to see how we respond to these challenges. The food, fertilizer and fuel crisis, the way we tackle that. I talked about interest rate and inflation management, and I think it's important how we go forward. Just before I close, I think it's also important for us to see how access, equity and inclusion, they are happening in our growth process, and that probably would ensure the nature of inclusive growth that we need to end up. And with my research institution, RIS, and with OECD, we are trying to develop a matrix in which we are, it's an old debate in economics, and people have been discussing about how do we go beyond GDP and how we measure economic growth, not just in context of our ability to respond, but also to realize the difference between growth and sustainable development. And that, I think, yesterday, those of you who see Economic Times might have seen this excellent interview by Akin Steiner, the head of the UNDP, and he mentioned that the Human Development Index, which Amartya Sen and Mahbubul Haq evolved, the time has come that we go beyond that. Some of us have been arguing for a well-being index. The UK Treasury constituted Dasgupta panel to bring in importance of biodiversity in the Treasury's report, to emphasize if we evolve this well-being index, what kind of contours it would have. And I think in the G20 meeting, very soon you would hear some mention of we at least constituting a study group on how we can go beyond GDP to bring in that equity dimension, that inclusion dimension, and access. And these three dimensions of AEI are going to be extremely important if we have to have the equity and inclusion in the growth process. As Dr. Kumar very rightly mentioned, we can't grow with leaving several people behind. It has to be an inclusive process. Fortunately, in last 8 years, government has accomplished 365 million Jan Dhan accounts, which has shown how financial inclusion can happen. Some of that I'm myself seeing on the ground with a couple of states. I think we need to do much more, but this is also extremely satisfying. I thank this platform and excellent initiative by Vasant Vihar Club. I would have to leave now, so all questions would be targeted to them. I would be free from this, but thanks a lot for this opportunity. Thanks, General Prasad. Thank you.
You really can't stay for a question? Okay. Thank you so much for a very thought-provoking and informative talk, Professor Sachin Chaturvedi and Dr. Goswami and Dr. Kumar. So he has left you holding the baby to answer the questions. We will take a couple of questions from the audience on today's topic. And before that, since Professor Sachin Chaturvedi is going, a memento on behalf of Vasant Vihar Club to him. All right. In the meantime, any of you who want to scratch your heads and keep your questions ready, somebody will come with a cordless mic to you. Ravinder? There are two gentlemen who have raised their hands. May I request everyone to keep their questions brief and to the point.
Rajiv ji, good morning. It was really nice to know that you are a resident of the colony. I enjoy seeing you in the TV debates, and I really love you. I have just one question. The question is, all the economists in the world, not in the world, in India, in the world, they are doing things about it. In India, know that there's a demand and supply curve, you are aware of it. Demand on the left side is always more in India because there's a stress on education, on healthcare, on infrastructure, name it, because of one reason, and that is the burgeoning population in India. Now, there is a Malthusian theory on economics. Too many scarce resources are, chasing this burgeoning population. India, no politician or economist talks about this population explosion, China is going to again beat us because they have contained their population. So, my only request to you and my question to you is, why not call a spade a spade, and address this problem so that all other related issues are taken care of? Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks. This spade was called a spade many time ago, long decades ago in our country. You remember the time that we had. And the result, thankfully the result of this is, but the way we tackled it was very different from the way Chinese tackled it. Thank God for that. The Chinese are having to now import brides from Vietnam and Mongolia and so on. I know that for a fact. And they are now incentivizing couples to have the third child, etc. $3,000, by the way. I say this also to say that you should look at if we look at the population figures, you will notice that our population growth rate, fertility growth rate for all India has now come down to 2, which means that we are only going to replace our population. Fertility growth rate is the number of children a woman has in her lifetime, is already 2. And in the 6 southern states, it's below 2. And in one of them, I think in Kerala, it's now 1.7. So that in those 6 states, population is actually declining already. The population problem is confined only to 4 states in India, which is Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, UP, Bihar. These are the 4 large states. And therefore, you can't have a national policy for 4 states. And the best policy, my friend, you can have is to have a women education policy. That's all that we need. And if you do that, irrespective of caste, community, creed, etc., you will see population coming down and stabilizing. Already the UN says that we will stabilize, sure, at 1.61 billion in 2045. And that rate is accelerating. Yesterday itself, we talked about it. So I honestly believe, and I ask you to believe, that there is no need for a population policy at this stage in this country. What we need is a human resource policy. Improve access and quality of your education and health. The rest will be taken care of. More than enough. Yeah? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Whoever asks the next question, please also introduce yourself.
Good morning, Dr. Goswami. My name is Tarun Bora. 2 linked questions, if I may, very quickly. You talked about issues of unemployment, you talked about urbanization, you talked about healthcare, if I'm not mistaken. The common thread running through these, isn't it lack of inclusive growth? Isn't that the problem? That's a common problem running through the lot of that.
That's a given.
Yeah,
but
so
there's something much more worrisome that...
Yeah, I'm just coming to the question. The question is that the 6.5% growth which we talk about, isn't it very top-down? Isn't it top-heavy? So that's part one. The second is when you talk of urbanization and employment, you talked about a lot of migrant population moving in from the agricultural areas into the urban areas in search of better prospects. Now, isn't that a worry that still a largely agrarian economy like ours, which has to feed 1.5 billion people, you're not incentivizing the agricultural sector to produce and to stay in that sector because the next generation is moving out, and do you see that as a problem going forward?
Okay, so let me take your second question first. It is entirely right that more than 70% of the population, 72% of the population live in rural India, and where it's not entirely agriculture, but where agriculture is an important part of their sustenance. It is also the case that after the Green Revolution and some work that was happened thereafter, we have not had any significant yield improvements and significant crop improvements over time, barring small sections of India where there has been, a great deal of investment in fruits and in certain kinds of high-value crops other than cereals. Okay, so it is entirely the case that the agricultural sector, even though this couple of years have been doing relatively better, is entirely insufficient to take care of the number of people who work and live in rural India. And therefore, it is a given that we are going to have increasing migration from rural India to urban India. The issue is you can't stop that because to create a situation in rural India where agricultural yields and productivity go up so much that people remain in rural India and not migrate to urban India is a long, long task. It doesn't happen in a few years. And we've neglected it in some measure. So yes, we are going to have that migration. The question is really, number one, is what kind of urban systems are we creating in order to deal with that migration? And regrettably, we haven't. We are, given the mass migration that is happening and going to happen over time, we haven't created sufficient urban systems to accommodate that migration, and it is a very worrisome thing. I'm not talking about my concerns that I already spoke about of education and health. But back to Rajiv's point, at the end of the day, where we have failed, and we have failed right from 1947 onwards, we have absolutely failed in ensuring decent education for people. And I'm not talking of an IIT where we haven't failed, but I'm talking of decent primary and middle school education and decent technical education for people. And where we have failed is to have absolutely decent health facilities and nutrition facilities for people. And this is starting to bite us.
Okay, one last question, please.
Okay, I'm Gurdeep Singh. I like the number you mentioned of that we'll have a sustained 6.5% GDP growth in the years to come. It's already there, but largely fueled by government expenditure, and hopefully the private sector will now step in and increase. But 6.5% is not really enough if we want to have serious poverty alleviation and to create employment. So the question then is that if the global economy is going to grow by 4.4, 4.7%, which is considerably higher than what it has been done just now, how can we leverage that to get a boost in our exports, but exports of labor-intensive products, which is one way China had grown. If the Chinese wages have gone up, as they have, we have a wage advantage, but there's something lacking in the policy making, that investments go to places like Vietnam and Indonesia, which really should be coming to us with our large labor force, trained, untrained as it may be. So I'd like to hear what your views are on that, please.
On exports, I think it's, I highlighted it, I emphasized it in my own talk, that we can't do without ramping up our exports. We've suffered from export pessimism for a very long time, and that's got to change. So I think but this government is trying to do many things now, which is one of them that you remember is called the Production-Linked Incentive Scheme. For the first time in 14 sectors, we are saying that we will actually hand out cash to the extent of $26 billion over the next 5 years for companies which achieve global scale and global competitiveness. And they've got targets given. And, the best examples of those two are, one is Apple, for example, which, Niti Aayog helped to bring in, and then you got Samsung and others in other sectors as well. So that's the first. So trade policy, EXIM policy, export promotion policy, has to go hand in hand with a well-governed, and critical words, well-governed industrial policy. And by well-governed, for example, something that should happen now is that each of these PLI sectors should get a sunset clause that their tariffs will be reduced to zero as we go forward, which is not happening so far. So that's the second point. We are still scared of, but we need to get over this fact of, tariffs being, too low. Second is that we have to get over our fear of the East India Company. This spectre has haunted us for too long, and we therefore are scared very often of the FDI that we get, that we need to attract FDI, because with that comes capital plus technology plus market access. And that's what, China has done, for our labor-intensive exports especially. So that's what you do. The third thing, and we can go on, but I'll end there. The two things more. One, we should and we have to make agriculture an export-oriented sector. We can do that, and because our geographical advantages are huge, and we can do that. But that's not. The last one is that we need to. The last one is on exports. Is that we need to get states involved in the export effort. And therefore, Niti Aayog had started a process of called Export Preparedness Index for each state. And what you have to do is that your export policies will have to be focused and tailored, made to every state. You can't have the same incentive policy for Punjab and for Tamil Nadu, because they have completely different export cultures. So therefore, you need to bring in the states as partners for pushing up exports in a major way. And that's what we need to go.
I'm just going to say one word, and excuse me, sir. There was a lady who wanted to ask a question, so we should accommodate her.
Veena ji, you still have your question?
Yeah, but just one sec. I just wanted to say one thing to you. And it's ice. I would recommend people, forget about China, I would recommend people to go and see garment factories in Bangladesh. Forget about China, okay? Just go and see the size, the scale, the productivity, and the role of women in the garment factories in Bangladesh, okay? And see how poor we are compared to them. This is somewhere which we ought to have had comparative advantage. At one point we did. We have consistently whittled that away. And we have pieces of rubbish which are supposed to be garment factories compared to what is in Bangladesh, right? And therefore, it's not surprising that Bangladesh has the share that it has, followed by Vietnam. So it's, one thing we do very well. We are doing less in this regime, I must say, which is true. But one thing we do very well is we talk loud and then take the gun and shoot our own feet, right? We do this consistently and well. And this is an example of that. Ma'am.
Thank you very much. This is to Professor Goswami. My name is Sumita Ganguly. These figures were striking, that about 500 million of our young citizens, 19 to 45, they are looking for employment, if I understood correctly. Now, we hear a lot about skilling India. We have, but what exactly is happening?
Nothing. Nothing compared to what ought to be done. It's not as if nothing is happening, but nothing compared to what ought to be done. We have just now, we have a tidal wave, and we haven't prepared the defense, as it were, okay? It's not as if the defense can't be prepared. Unfortunately, much of this skilling India over and above what the center gives through budgets and grants in aid to states is very much something that states should do. Unfortunately, barring the odd states, most of the states that need the greatest amount of skilling to take place are bankrupt. The states are completely bankrupt and therefore have no resources, both in financial terms and in human resource terms, to create viable institutions that will consistently do this. So yes, we talk a lot about it because it's a good talk. We do very little of it.
Quickly, on a strategic point, the skilled young Indians would fit in very well with the MSME expansion and restoration.
Skilled young Indians, if they are skilled with some, stuff that makes sense, would fit in many places.
Yeah, but I mean, having been in the government for 5 years, I must disagree. We have done a fair bit. This government had tried to do a fair bit. There was a Ministry of Skills for the first time. There was a NSDC, the National Skill Development Corporation. You got the education policy, the National Education Policy, which tries to bring in skills within the education system. So it's happening slowly, and maybe too slowly. But the real issue about the people between 20 and 30 is retraining and reskilling, which is difficult, right? And that's what we need to focus on much more than what we've done so far. And the states, again, have to be brought into it. And by the way, the other thing that's happening is, which is good, is the formalization of the informal sector. Because that also would mean that you would get more skills working there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Goswami and Dr. Rajiv Kumar, for a brilliant perspective of this topic. We will really have to end here, but before you go, as a token of our appreciation, Mr. Aluwalia would hand over mementos on behalf of Vasant Vihar Club.
Thank you.